February 12th, 1965, 11:47 p.m., Studio 6B at NBC in Burbank, California. 40 million Americans were watching The Tonight Show when Frank Sinatra pointed his finger at Bob Dylan and said the words that would become legendary. "You call that music? That's not music. That's noise made by someone who can't sing." The studio audience gasped. Johnny Carson froze behind his desk. Dean Martin, sitting between them on the panel couch, looked like he wanted to disappear. And Bob Dylan, 23 years old, wearing sunglasses indoors and a black leather jacket, just smiled. Because Dylan knew something Sinatra didn't. This wasn't going to end the way Sinatra expected. The attack had been building all night. From the moment Dylan walked onto the stage, Sinatra had been making faces, rolling his eyes during Dylan's performance, whispering to Dean Martin, making it clear to everyone watching that he thought this scruffy kid with a harmonica was a joke. But now, live on national television, with 40 million witnesses, Sinatra had made it personal. And Dylan was about to respond in a way that would shock everyone in that studio, everyone watching at home, and Frank Sinatra most of all. But to understand why this moment mattered so much, you need to know what brought these two legends to the same couch. The war between the old guard and the new voice, between the crooners and the poets. This is the story of the night Bob Dylan destroyed Frank Sinatra without raising his voice. 2 days before, Bob Dylan was in a New York recording studio working on his new album, Bringing It All Back Home. His manager, Albert Grossman, burst in with news. "The Tonight Show wants you, this Friday." Dylan looked up from his guitar. "Who else is on?" Albert hesitated. "Sinatra and Dean Martin." Dylan set down his guitar. "Sinatra hates me. I know. He's been telling reporters I can't sing, that I'm ruining music. I know that too. So why would I go?" Albert smiled. "Because 40 million people will be watching. And because Sinatra thinks you're going to be intimidated, prove him wrong." Dylan thought about it. Frank Sinatra represented everything Dylan had spent his career fighting against. The old establishment, the polished, safe version of music that said nothing real, nothing dangerous. Sinatra sang about love in a tuxedo. Dylan sang about war and injustice in jeans. Sinatra had been telling anyone who would listen that Dylan was a fraud, a kid with no real talent, and now they wanted to put them on the same couch. "I'll do it," Dylan said. Albert looked surprised. "You will?" "Yeah, but I'm performing electric." "Bob, that's going to make it worse. Sinatra already hates—" "That's exactly why I'm doing it. Have you ever walked into a situation knowing it would be hostile? That's what Bob Dylan did when he agreed to appear on The Tonight Show with Frank Sinatra. Friday night, 7:30 p.m. Dylan arrived at NBC Studios 3 hours before showtime. The green room was already crowded. Frank Sinatra sat in the corner, drink in hand. Dean Martin was getting makeup done. Johnny Carson reviewed note cards. When Dylan walked in, the room went quiet. Sinatra looked up, looked Dylan up and down. "Well, well, the voice of a generation has arrived." It wasn't a compliment. Dylan nodded. "Mr. Sinatra." "You can call me Frank. We're all friends here." Sinatra's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I heard you're performing tonight. What are you singing?" "Just a new one I've been working on." "Electric or acoustic?" "Electric." Sinatra's expression darkened. Dean Martin caught Dylan's eye and gave a small shake of his head, a warning. Sinatra stood up, walked over to Dylan, eye to eye. "Let me give you some advice, kid. Real music takes training, talent, years of learning your craft." Sinatra's voice was low, but everyone could hear. "You can't just pick up a guitar and call yourself a musician." Dylan's voice was calm. "I've been playing guitar since I was 10. Playing and being good at it are two different things. I guess 40 million people tonight will decide which one I am." The room went silent. This was a direct challenge. Dean Martin stood up. "Frank, come on. We're all here to put on a good show, right?" Sinatra kept his eyes on Dylan. Then he smiled. Cold. "Right. A good show. That's exactly what we're here for." He walked back to his corner. But everyone in that green room knew something had shifted. This wasn't going to be a friendly interview. This was going to be a fight. 11:17 p.m. Johnny Carson's voice boomed through the studio. Ladies and gentlemen, performing his new song, Subterranean Homesick Blues, please welcome Bob Dylan. The curtain opened. Dylan walked out with his band. Electric guitars, drums, bass. This wasn't the folk singer America knew. This was something new, something dangerous. Sinatra was sitting on the panel couch waiting for his segment. The camera caught his face as Dylan's band started playing. He looked disgusted. Dylan launched into the song. Fast, aggressive, poetic lyrics tumbling over electric guitar. The studio audience didn't know what to make of it. This was rock and roll, raw and unpolished. Sinatra leaned over to Dean Martin. The microphones picked it up. This is what passes for music now? God help us all. Dean Martin looked uncomfortable. Frank, not now. The song finished. Polite applause, confused applause. Dylan walked to the panel couch, sat down, shook Johnny Carson's hand. Carson tried to keep it light. Well, that was certainly different. Bob Dylan, everyone. More applause. Dylan nodded, cool, unbothered. Carson turned to Sinatra. Frank, you've been in the music business for 30 years. What did you think of that? And that's when it started to fall apart. Sinatra took a sip of his drink, looked directly at the camera. 40 million people watching. You want my honest opinion, Johnny? Carson suddenly looked nervous. Well, I think that was the worst thing I've ever heard on television. The studio went silent. Dylan sat 3 feet away. Didn't move. Just watched through his sunglasses. Sinatra continued. That's not music. That's noise. Banging on guitars and yelling lyrics nobody can understand. Carson tried to laugh it off. Well, Frank, music is changing. The younger generation doesn't know what real music is. Sinatra pointed at Dylan. This kid here, he can't sing. He can't carry a tune. He's got a voice like sandpaper on wood. Dean Martin shifted uncomfortably. Frank, come on. No, Dean. Someone needs to say it. Sinatra was warming up now, getting angry. We've got kids all over America thinking this is music, thinking anyone can pick up a guitar and call themselves an artist. It's garbage. The camera cut to Dylan. He was smiling, a small, knowing smile. And that smile made Sinatra even angrier. You think this is funny? Sinatra asked directly to Dylan. Dylan's voice was quiet, calm. I think you're entitled to your opinion. My opinion is based on 30 years in this business. What's your opinion based on? 3 years of playing coffee houses? The audience was dead silent. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a public execution attempt. Johnny Carson looked panicked. Gentlemen, maybe we should take a commercial break. No, Sinatra interrupted. I'm not done. He turned fully to face Dylan. You want to know what I really think? Dylan didn't respond, just waited. I think you're a fraud. I think you got lucky with a few protest songs when protest was popular. And I think in 5 years, nobody's going to remember your name. The words hung in the air like smoke. 40 million people held their breath. And Bob Dylan, 23 years old, sitting next to one of the most powerful men in music, did something nobody expected. He laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It wasn't defensive. It was genuine amusement. Sinatra's face went red. You think this is funny? Dylan took off his sunglasses, looked directly at Sinatra, and spoke in that distinctive nasal voice that Sinatra had just mocked. Mr. Sinatra, the times they are a-changin', and you can either change with them, or you can sit here on national television telling 40 million people that you don't understand what's happening. Your choice. The studio audience gasped. Sinatra stood up. Actually stood up. On live television. Johnny Carson jumped in. Frank, please, let's all just... But Dylan wasn't done. He stood up too. They were eye to eye now. You want to talk about real music? Dylan's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath. Real music is truth. Real music makes people feel something. Real music changes things. And you think your music does that? Sinatra shot back. I think my music says something. Your music says you love someone. That's nice. My music says maybe we should stop sending kids to die in wars. Which one do you think matters more? The audience erupted, half cheering, half shocked. Dean Martin finally stood up. put himself between them physically. Guys, come on, this is the Tonight Show, not a boxing match. Sinatra looked at Dean, then at Dylan, then at the audience. For the first time in his career, Frank Sinatra looked like he didn't know what to say. Dylan put his sunglasses back on, sat down. I'm just here to play music, Mr. Sinatra. If you don't like it, that's fine. But trying to humiliate me on television, that just makes you look scared. Scared? Sinatra's voice rose. Scared of what? Scared that your time is over. The words hit like a bomb. Johnny Carson called for commercial. The cameras cut. But the damage was done. Frank Sinatra had tried to destroy Bob Dylan on live television, and Dylan had destroyed him right back. The moment the cameras cut, Sinatra exploded. Who the hell does this kid think he is? Dylan stood up, started walking toward the exit. Where are you going? Carson asked desperately. I'm done, Dylan said simply. Dean Martin grabbed his arm. Bob, wait, just wait. Dylan stopped, looked at Dean. Dean's voice was quiet. You just did something nobody's ever done. You stood up to Frank Sinatra on national television, in front of 40 million people. He started it. I know, and you finished it. Dean smiled slightly. But if you walk out now, he wins. Because tomorrow the story will be that you couldn't handle the pressure. Stay, finish the show, prove you're not rattled. Dylan looked back at Sinatra, who was surrounded by producers trying to calm him down. One more segment, Dean said. Then you're free. Dylan thought about it, then nodded. One more segment. They returned to the couch. Sinatra was still fuming, but trying to regain composure. The cameras came back on. Johnny Carson looked like he'd aged 5 years in 3 minutes. Welcome back, Carson said with forced cheerfulness. We're here with Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Bob Dylan. And, well, things got a little heated before the break. Understatement of the century. Carson tried to steer conversation to safer topics. Dean Martin told a joke. The tension eased slightly. But then Carson made a mistake. Bob, Frank raised some interesting points about the direction of modern music. Do you have a response? Dylan looked at Sinatra. I already gave my response. But surely you can understand his perspective. He's been making music for decades. And I respect that. But respect goes both ways. Dylan turned to Sinatra. You don't have to like my music, but you don't get to tell me it's not real just because it's different from yours. Sinatra opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, because Dylan was right, and everyone knew it. When the show finally ended at 1 a.m., the studio audience didn't leave. They stood there, talking, arguing, processing what they just witnessed. Backstage, Dylan was surrounded by reporters who'd been in the audience. Bob, how does it feel to go toe-to-toe with Frank Sinatra? It feels like I said what needed to be said. Do you regret it? No. Sinatra called your music noise. Across the hall, Sinatra was holding court with his own group. That kid's finished, Sinatra was saying. Nobody disrespects Frank Sinatra and survives. But Dean Martin, standing in the doorway, shook his head. Frank, I love you, but you're wrong. Dean's voice was quiet. That kid just changed everything. And you know it. Sinatra looked at his friend. What are you talking about? The old way is dying, Frank. Tonight, that was the funeral. Dean walked away, left Sinatra standing there, because Dean Martin understood something Sinatra didn't want to accept. Bob Dylan had won. Saturday morning, Dylan woke up to his phone ringing off the hook. Every major newspaper in America had the story on the front page. Dylan destroys Sinatra on live TV. Generational clash. Young Dylan stands up to Sinatra. 40 million watch music history, the night everything changed. Radio stations were playing Dylan's music on repeat. Everyone was talking about it. Record stores reported Dylan's albums sold out by noon. And Sinatra? He gave an interview that afternoon trying to walk back his comments. I was just expressing an opinion. I respect all forms of music. But it was too late. Dean Martin called Dylan. You okay, kid? I'm fine. Good, because what you did last night took guts. Frank's your friend. I didn't mean to. Frank's my friend, but he was wrong, and you were right to stand up for yourself. Dean paused. The old guard doesn't go down easy, but it does go down. You just proved that. Dylan thought about that night. about standing in front of 40 million people while one of the most powerful men in music tried to humiliate him, and about how he'd refused to back down. 2025, 60 years later. Music historians still call it one of the most important moments in television history, not because of what was said, but because of what it represented. The old guard trying to hold on to power, the new voice refusing to be silenced. Before his death, Frank Sinatra was asked about that night. "I was wrong," Sinatra admitted in 1998. "Dylan was right. Times were changing, and I was scared of becoming irrelevant. So I attacked him. It wasn't my finest moment." Dean Martin talked about it too. "That night, I watched two eras of music face each other, and I knew the era I represented was ending. Bob Dylan didn't just win an argument, he won the future. And Dylan, he rarely talks about it, but when he does, he's gracious." Sinatra was a legend, one of the greatest singers who ever lived. We disagreed about what music should be. That's all. But the people who were in that studio remember differently. They remember the moment Bob Dylan proved that talent and truth are more powerful than establishment and intimidation. They remember 40 million people watching one young man refuse to be bullied by one of the most powerful entertainers in America. And they remember the night music changed forever, because that's what happened on February 12th, 1965. The old guard tried to destroy the new voice, and the new voice destroyed the old guard, without raising his voice, without losing his cool, just by speaking truth to power, and 40 million people never forgot it.